Testing 1, 2, 3. Good afternoon. It's great to see you all here. My name is Doss Williams, your First District Supervisor. I want to thank the Montecito Association for sponsoring this gathering. You have with us today essentially each a representative from each portion of the county team involved in this recovery. And I think what we've learned really the hard way, but also learned in a good way, is that information matters, that the more that you know, the more opportunities that we have to share information with you, the better. And that's why we wanted to do this community meeting. I know if you're like myself and have evacuated 4 times or more, that you are in some ways mentally, maybe physically exhausted. All the more that I appreciate that you're here to have the conversation, learn more, and be updated. I'll give you a couple updates on what is happening legislatively at the County Board of Supervisors. Yesterday, I initiated an ask to Planning and Development to streamline the rebuilding process when the geology, in cases where the geology is deemed safe, to streamline it in a similar but different process to the T-fire. How many of you remember that process in the T-fire? I know there's some folks up there in the Mountain Drive area too. That process was, you were allowed to build without a land use permit in cases where your building was the same building envelope in the same location as the previous time. Now, the land use permit, typically in a development, a land use permit is required and a building permit. The land use permit is the one that everyone groans about because it takes forever and is appealable and all that sort of stuff. So I want to, and the Board of Supervisors seem to agree, want to expand the definition of like for like to enable you to move the footprint. If you decide to do the same footprint on a rebuilt structure, but move it away from the creek or to higher ground, and so thereby rebuild in a way that is safer, more resilient in the long run. As long as you don't intrude into the setbacks of the parcel, you would be able to do that without a land use permit, and that would fit in the new definition of like for like. Next week at the Board of Supervisors, we will also have a really important matter. As you know, we encourage people to use as much of the mud on site as possible, simply for long-term resiliency. 3 or 5 feet sometimes made the difference between life and death in this last disaster. And so if you can rebuild in a way that use that mud to be 5 feet higher, we want to help you do that. However, we are also aware that not everyone is going to be able to retain all their mud on site, and we are very aware of how expensive it has been to dispose of that mud. And so, though the cost, which was more at about $1,000 a truck full, has fallen to more like $750 a truck fill, we know that a part of that cost is the distance that you have to truck it and the fact that tipping fees are high. Politicians don't always have good ideas. Sometimes they just find good ideas, but in this case, I had a good idea. We are going to take it at Tehigas. We can't dispose of it at Tehigas because we have been rejected from our capacity applications from the state. But we can sort it there and thereby take it from you, and so it's no longer your problem. And we will dispose of the mud portion at a ranch that the county owns, and we will take the organics portion and chip them up and use them responsibly. But the most important thing for the user's perspective is that the tipping fee will not cost $99 a ton, but will be $55 a ton. But we do need legislative approval for that. We went forward with it for about 3 days, and then our lawyers said, no, actually, you actually have to vote on that. So we will be doing that on Tuesday the 20th, which is next Tuesday. So if this matters to you, you might put in a good word if you like this idea with my colleagues to make sure we get it done. With that, I want to introduce you. We won't have plenty of time for question and answers, so there's not going to be long speeches, but there are some important updates, and I'll introduce. Our first one is from Matt Pontus. Many of you have asked for a czar, and though I'm more of a Bonapartist than a royalist, I have tried to answer that request. Matt Pontus is our recovery czar and has an update for us all. Matt?
Thanks, Doss, I think. Hi, everybody, again. It's nice to be here. I'd like to start out again by thanking Anthony and the Montecito Association for all the hard work it took to get us here and to get us organized so that we could be here and be part of this informational exchange. And like Doss said, we're looking forward to spending more time answering questions than actually up here on stage talking. So I'd also like to thank the food bank out in the back there that's come and making sure that everybody knows that those services are available. And Montecito Fire and our Santa Barbara County Sheriff that are here also as part of your community and part of protecting your community in various ways that they do. So it's nice to be back here again. We've it's been about a month or so since we were here, and a lot has happened in the last month. And just to bring you up to speed on a couple things real quick, as you're aware, and as you've probably heard through various channels, we have three main recovery objectives here, and one is to return the residents and the open businesses as soon as possible back to their homes and their businesses, to support the repair and building of homes and businesses, and get residents' livelihoods back to normal as soon as possible. Also, to develop resiliency through the community, through disaster preparedness, through mitigation improvements, and through our social and individual resiliency. So as you know, we've spent a lot of time on the last than the weeks behind us, clearing roads, culverts. There's been over 50 miles of roads that have been cleared, over 200 culverts and 20 bridges, no less than 8,000 truck trips, which you're all acutely aware of, to remove just the debris on the public road right-of-ways. Some of the culvert cleaning, the repairs, and the bridge reconstruction is going to take some time, as you're aware. We have 3 county bridges that are part of those bridge replacements, and the rest are Caltrans. Of our 11 debris basins, there's been over 400,000 cubic yards of material removed with the good work of Army Corps of Engineers, removing that so that we could have safe, ensure another element of our safety is prepared for the storms ahead. As Doss alluded to earlier, trying to find a place for the debris has been one of our biggest challenges. And we do have an option going before the board next week that allows our Tahigas facility to be used for a sorting facility where we'll pull out some of the wood debris and some of the rocks, separate out the clean fill dirt, and then deposit the dirt on the backside of the facility, and then later use it as fill for the landfill itself. So it's a really innovative idea and allows us to really clean it up and not use up a lot of our usable landfill space that was meant for trash with clean fill soil. So that's going on. Many of you may be aware also that we have a materials exchange website out there now for folks that want to put some of their dirt up and see if we have some takers on wanting dirt in some of our valley areas in Santa Maria and south of us. Same thing for rocks and other debris. And we're getting a lot of folks on there and having some success with being able to put a buyer and a seller, or a willing giver and a taker for a lot of those materials. That seems to be a big hit lately. we've got an ongoing collaboration with a lot of other entities to try and make sure that, that we're being creative as we look for additional places to put some of the debris. We are in communications with Ventura County still on trying to use some of the debris for filling up old mines that have to be filled up anyway. So it made a good solution to put that stuff somewhere. We also have other programs that, that help us place household waste and some other things that you'll be hearing a little bit more of all the time. Supervisor Williams also talked a little bit about the like-for-like ordinance that the Planning and Development team is going to be working on. And because of the unique nature of this disaster and needing to have a little bit of flexibility with folks as they rebuild their homes, perhaps in different locations or on different parts of their parcels, with further setbacks possibly from the creeks. So we have staff working on that, and we'll be taking that back to the board here soon. We have a team of architects, our local Institute of Architects working together, sort of a task force and a think tank of folks that are all working together to try and come up with innovative solutions. And I know that several of them have been hired by folks in the community already to start looking at things. So we see a lot of solutions coming through that as well. Hopefully you've noticed a little bit of improvement in our traffic management in and around the community over the last couple of weeks. We have a team of individuals that includes the California Highway Patrol, Caltrans. Our County Roads Department has helped leading those efforts with SBCAG and the City of Santa Barbara to try and do everything we can to keep the traffic moving. So there's a lot of innovative ideas and solutions. They've certainly made it better, and we still certainly have a long ways to go to continue to improve our traffic congestion in and around the community. A couple other things I want to make sure that everyone's aware about. We can talk for a few minutes about the storms and storm readiness. Obviously, over the last couple weeks, we've been challenged with some rains that have met the criteria for us to be concerned about moving debris in the watersheds, and as these storms reach the threshold per hour and some of the other thresholds in terms of intensity and duration, that we are sticking to a plan that allows us to message the community and evacuate the community. And I know that it's a huge task to ask everyone to pack up your belongings and to leave. And I know that a lot of people are leaving, and some folks are choosing to stay. And it's frustrating for your emergency managers as well, because they put a lot of time and effort into, do we evacuate, do we not? Does it really meet the threshold? What's the confidence level of their meteorologists out there? And I can tell you that I sit in those meetings, and there are a lot of weighing of different opinions and a lot of good conversations. And one of the things that, as frustrating as it is when we get storms that kind of fall apart before they deliver their predicted amount of rainfall, it's kind of frustrating because everybody went through a lot of work to get out. But I was also thinking about a positive way to talk about that. And that is that if we could put aside all the evacuations and the notifications and the alerts and all that kind of stuff, and think about if we wanted the rain to come and help mend some of our soil up in the burn scars, and we would ask for the rain gods to give us light, gentle rain and a series of storms with a little bit of sunshine between them that comes kind of spread out, and that would be our optimum. That's what we would really want. And that is part of the message that gets forgot about, as a lot of us are caught up in, should we evacuate, should we not evacuate? Is it really safe this time? Is the storm really going to do that? We have been blessed with some storms that have not been at the severity and the magnitude of the January 9 event. So I just wanted to take a second to recognize that the rainfalls and light rainfalls that we received earlier this week, and that we'll get a few more storms later this week, that probably do not meet the thresholds, that's a good thing. It's a really good thing for our mountains, for our environment, and for the species of vegetation and plants up there that need that light rain in order to reseed and to get moving. So we're certainly not out of the woods yet, and as we've been talking about this whole time, it's going to be a process for several years before our hillsides recover enough to allow us to change some of those thresholds. And it's something we're all in together, and we're going to be here with you along the way, and we're going to try and have as consistent, as accurate, as messaging as possible as we move forward. And one of our biggest goals is to get you back in your homes. If we have to evacuate, to get you back in your homes as soon as possible. We certainly don't want any more inconvenience that's already there. And on the other side of the coin, your governmental agencies, Highway Patrol, our County Roads Department, Flood Control, all of our first responders out there, and the fire disciplines, EMS, and the Sheriff's Office, and our police department here locally, are all working hard to make sure that they have enough resources just in case one of these storms happens, and it does cause more destruction and more things that we're not wanting. So I would continue to make sure that everybody is getting on the awareandprepare.org website and the readysbc.org website to make sure that you're up to date on all the latest warnings. We have also refined the map a few times, and with the advice of some of our city partners, refined some of those areas, and I'll be happy to answer some questions later on about those efforts. And with that, I think that I want to turn it over to, we're a little out of order here. I'm going to give it back to Doss, but I think we're going to go to Jeff Wilson.
Yeah. So next, many of you have questions about rebuilding. For the first time in our community meetings, we have a representative from Planning and Development, the folks who will actually be day-to-day processing permits, and he has some good news about our process.
Thank you for inviting me. Can you hear me? Thank you for inviting me to come tonight. Thank you, Supervisor Williams, for coming and participating in this meeting with the community. We appreciate the efforts that you're doing and the work that the community is doing to assist in helping each other with the rebuilding process. What I want to touch on is an update from the last meeting that we were at, that was held at the main county administration buildings, and then talk briefly about what we took to the board yesterday. There's a concerted effort from many different departments on the rebuilding process. There's a lot of questions that are unanswered, and I know that the questions that we're getting, and we can feel the frustration from the community as far as when can I start rebuilding, what is the process, what is it going to look like. So I want to touch a little bit on that tonight, just to provide some information and guidance, and the information that we took to the board yesterday in concert with the other departments. So as we all know, that things have changed, as Matt Pontes talked about and Supervisor Williams earlier, is that the area out there has changed significantly. The topography's changed, the creek channels have changed, there's a lot of change out there. And so what we're looking at is a unique set of circumstances that's different than what we were facing during the T-fire. And what that has also introduced is there's a gap of information, a gap of knowledge as far as what is the best way to ensure long-term safety and security of the structures, the rebuilding process as things go forward. That was part of the information that we took to the Board of Supervisors yesterday. So our department is working in concert with the Flood Control Division to amass as much information as we can, update information, so that way when we start into the rebuild process, we can provide the best possible information to help guide your decisions as far as how you would like to go forward with rebuilding your homes and getting back into your homes. One of the crucial pieces of information that we've been struggling or wrestling with is that the current FEMA maps that we've been using for years, that information is no longer accurate as far as what has changed out there due to the debris flow. And we use the term firm maps as far as identifying what that base flood elevation is and how high off of that elevation your buildings need to be. So that is really what we're striving to do, is to find that information and get it so that way we can fold that into the rebuilding process. So in an effort to do that, flood control is working with FEMA to do a mapping process, which is they're terming it as a risk hazard mapping, to identify these areas so that way we can at least get some data and information to help guide homeowners as they go through the rebuilding process. And that it's anticipated that that could take 2 to 3 months to get that completed. I was part of a kickoff meeting yesterday with flood control and FEMA where they laid out the progress or the process of what that is going to look like so that we can at least have an idea of what that information is looking like. One of our concerns is that the situation that we're in now could go on for the next 2 to 3 or 5 years as the storms come in, and we know that there's current hazards that may continue to exist out there. So our number one concern is that whatever the rebuilding is that it's done safely and securely. So currently what we're advising property owners to do is to allow the FEMA and flood control and the other departments to get this information so that way when we're starting to look at the rebuilding process and your plans or whatever's moving forward, we have that information to help guide what that rebuild is going to look like. So our advisory is to wait for that information to come forward. However, what we would also like to indicate to the property owners is if there's a circumstance or situation where you want to continue the process, you'd like to move ahead in the rebuilding process on your own, then you can do that. We recommend you waiting or advise you to waiting until we get all this information. And I know there's anxiety and a desire to move forward on the rebuilding process. If you choose to move forward, then what we recommend is that you meet with your case manager, also a member of flood control, and sit down and what we'd call like a pre-meeting and talk about what your goals are, what your objectives are, and what that rebuilding process would look like. And part of that is that if we do that ahead, or if you choose to do that ahead of where the mapping process is, then we would require additional information. Now there is a handout, I believe it's available in the back, or you might have already been handed out, that summarizes what I'm talking about now. On the back page of that is a list of potential items that you may be required to submit if you move ahead of the remapping process. Part of that could be whatever the current topography is, your property lines. We know that in some cases it's very difficult to find out where those property lines are. They've been changed, the monuments may be missing. So all that is key information to allow us to help with siting of the rebuilding process. There may be some information in regards to what your property looks like as it relates to the hydrological issues in the area, as well as working with the experts in the field to help provide as much information as far as geology and hydrological information. All that is listed on the back of that handout. I encourage you to review that. If there's any questions, then I'm available to answer those questions, as well as the case manager. So that, in summary, is really what we're presenting to the community tonight, that there's 2 paths. One, waiting for flood control, planning department, and FEMA to get through the mapping process, and then we have as much information we can with the rebuilding. The other one is, if you want to move forward, then we will be able to assist you with that, but there's going to be some information that we're going to need to help make the best decision possible. Really, as a quick update, I did want to talk about our interactive map. Do I have it? If I have a few more minutes? We said no long speeches, and I feel like I've been up here forever. So I do want to update everybody. One of the key ways that we could work together as a partnership in the rebuilding process is the decision making as far as what is existing on your property. And I want to introduce quickly in the way in the back, and we haven't practiced this, so it could be a little bit rocky. But I did want to introduce one of our staff, Ray Montano. So you may have met with her. She's been at the Montecito Center the last week. She's one of our lead planners on the rebuilding process, and so many of you may have her as your case manager. So if you have an opportunity, you can chat with her or I tonight. So what we've done in part of the rebuilding process is gaining information, and so what we've done is tried to push as much information and make it available to the public as possible. So Ray's going to run the computer in the back and read my mind and be able to show you what I can't see from here. I'll move up a little bit. So what we've did with this interactive map is that we have identified all those structures. The building, I mentioned this briefly, the building department went out and they did inspections of all the structures and they rated them red, yellow, and green. Red is the ones that were not safe to enter or occupy. Yellow meant that there was some repairs that may be needed, and then green was basically it was okay to enter and there might be some cleanup needed on the outside of it. And so what we're doing is we're updating this map on at least a weekly basis as properties go through this process of moving from red to green. So it's basically turning into a chronology or a live update of where properties are in the process. So what we do is encourage you to, you can locate your property on here. You can either search by your address, or if you know your APN number, you can do that through the top left. And I think Ray is showing us how to do that right now. This is on, thank you, great question. So to access this web page, you can go to the County of Santa Barbara Planning Department main page. And then there's two options on there. You'll see rebuilding interactive map, and then right below that link is there's the rebuilding process where we have some FAQs on there. So you can access that map through that, the planning department's webpage. So you just search County of Santa Barbara Planning Department and it'll pull up our main page. So if you click on, once you find your property, you can click on the square there. That square represents that a structure that has been identified with some type of damage. And so once you click on that square, it brings up a box. And in that box is a lot of information that will help you. At the bottom of the box, it identifies who your case manager is, as well as their email address. So if you haven't identified who your case manager is, you can go to this webpage, search your property address, APN number, and then once you click on that box, you scroll down and it'll give you who your case manager is, their email, and you can send them an email and say, I would like to begin working with you on getting information. What we've done is we're pulling a lot of public information into one source. And in there you can look at, there's one of the key pieces to help with what Supervisor Williams and Matt Pontus has talked about is looking at this like for like. And part of that is getting information to identify what was permitted on the property, what it looked like, so that way you can work with the county, work with your case manager on determining that you want to go through the like for like process. And once again, what that means is if it's determined that your property or your structures were permitted and you're building like for like, then you're exempt from the planning development review division permits and you go straight to the building counter. So it's basically you're exempt from permitting and you can save some time on that process. So what we've done is we've added a link there that talks about your property summary. So you click on that link and it goes exactly to a web page that lists a summary of all the permits that existed on that property. She's reading my mind, so she jumped out of me. There's another link there that talks about your permit history. Once you click on that, it'll take you to an archive where you can search by either your address or your parcel number, and what that does is take you to all the historical permits that we have on your property that have been scanned. So you can start looking at, here's all the permits on my property, and it'll actually show you a scanned version of what that permit looks like. And we're working with local private planning firms, consultants that are helping us get as much data in there. So this data is being updated constantly with new information as we continue with our research. And then in addition, we have where you can link to our electronic database tracking software. We can go in and you can search by your permits. That's live now, it works, where you can look at case notes and information. So you go into the Google search and you go County of Santa Barbara Planning Department.
So on that website, why don't we just, we'll set up a link, so you just go to the county's recoverysbc.org, and we'll put a big, bold icon there to send it right to your guys' site. So we have one place, one-stop shop in there.
That'd be perfect, thank you. Okay, go ahead. That is correct, ma'am. You'll be exempt from the planning permits. You would still be required to get the building permits. So anyway, and it also has a link to the APN parcel page. And so we just witnessed county government working together. Thank you, Matt, for doing that. That'll make it easy for everybody to access this map because it's a valuable tool to get as much information on the planning and development side that's readily available to everyone that is there. So then I just want to touch really quickly on case managers. I mentioned briefly, each property has been assigned a case manager. That case manager is there to guide and direct you through the rebuilding process, your initial contact. That case manager can help with the research of the permitting, interface with the Building and Safety Division, interface with other departments if there's questions, to allow you to navigate the permitting process, because sometimes we know that it could be daunting. So the role of the case manager is to be that one voice and single point of contact with our department. So that way you can have one person to go to. So that is my presentation. Thank you again for that, and I'll turn it back over to Supervisor Williams.
Thank you, Jeff, and I think many of you will have some questions for him later, and we'll be here to answer questions. If you are not directly affected, you are still affected by all the ramifications of this disaster. Obviously, traffic being one of the largest that impacts this quality of life, but also I view as a very dire economic threat on our local businesses and our economic vitality. It's difficult for businesses to operate when there's traffic in front of them all the time. It's also difficult for businesses to operate when their workers take 2 hours to get to work. That impacts productivity and could obviously threaten our economy in the long run. So with that dire introduction, I will bring Matt Daubertine to talk to you about the rebuilding of the 192 bridges. Matt? Matt's with our County Public Works.
Great. Thank you, Supervisor. So my name is Matt Daubertine. I'm with Santa Barbara County Public Works. My role in helping with the Montecito recovery has been with planning and logistics with the Transportation Division of Public Works. And then also, because I work with Caltrans on the 101 widening project, I was asked to be the point of contact to help the community and the county and Caltrans coordinate more effectively on the reconstruction of Highway 192. Before I begin, I just wanted to say I am so sorry about what has happened to your community. There is not a day that goes by when I don't pause at my desk and I think about the challenges and the issues that you're facing every single day. And all of us who are involved in the recovery are not going away until this job is done. We all stand committed to work with you until the job is completed, until it's done right, and we are going to do this together. So my update from Caltrans is there's a total of 6 bridges that they're working on. There's 4 that are total replacements, and that there are 2 that they're just replacing the bridge rails that were washed out during the event. So going through each of them one by one, Montecito at 192, this is Montecito Creek at 192, is located just west of Hot Springs Road. This is a total replacement. At San Ysidro Creek in 192, this is the cross street at Randall Road. They're just replacing the bridge rails, and work has already begun. And this is actually the only structure where they don't have any utility conflicts. All other the 5 bridge projects, they have utility relocations, which greatly complicates sort of the nature of the construction as you're doing the work on the bridges, because then you have to move gas lines and power and water, et cetera, and that takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of coordination with the utilities. Then we get to Romero Canyon. This is located just east of Sheffield, and this is a total replacement as well. There's 2 bridges kind of related to Toro. One is called Toro West. This is a bridge rail replacement only, and work has begun. And this bridge is located immediately east of Ladera Lane. Then there's Toro Canyon. This is Toro Canyon East. This is located right at 192 and Toro Canyon Road. This is also a total replacement. And then finally, Arroyo Paredon, located just west of Cravens on 192, and that is also a total replacement. At each of the replacement bridges, those four, the bridges are completely closed off, the roadways are closed off except to emergency vehicles. At the two bridges where they're doing the rail replacements, these bridges are open to one-way traffic, and they believe that throughout the reconstruction of these bridge rails, traffic should be able to flow back and forth across these bridges with only minor temporary closures. In order to expedite the construction of the bridges that are going to be replaced, they're using precast bridge decks. So rather than involving a complicated process where you're pouring concrete at the site, you're bringing in prefab panels, and that should make the construction process go that much faster. There's been some questions that have come up about the use of temporary bridges. And Caltrans looked at this quickly immediately after the event, and because Highway 192 and the places where these bridges are out is so constrained in terms of right-of-way, there's rocks, there's signature trees, there's all kinds of features that make it very difficult to operate in that area. They concluded that it was going to complicate the construction. It was too hard to get them installed, and that ultimately it would delay the full reconstruction of the bridges. So that idea was rejected because, again, it would just delay everything even longer. Utility conflicts, again, occur at 5 of the bridges, and the utility relocations really are the key drivers to the schedule. And so as they've teased this out, once they have the utilities dealt with, barring unforeseen circumstances, the construction of the bridges will take about 8 to 12 months. This is the most firm construction schedule that I've seen to date issued by Caltrans. So once you see a bridge being demolished, barring unforeseen circumstances, you should see a roadway being opened up in that area within 8 to 12 months. The goal is to have construction going simultaneously on all of the structures, and the structures will remain in place for emergency vehicles. Once the utilities are dealt with, demolition will happen, and then they'll immediately start the construction. But they won't be taking out the bridges until they complete the utility relocation. Security Paving will be the contractor on 5 of the bridges, and then Lash Construction has been selected for Arroyo Paredon. Some of you have contacted me already about having a look at the preliminary designs. I'll be coordinating that opportunity to make sure that we at least have an opportunity to look at them, see what's happening, have a conversation about what drives bridge design on a state highway, what sort of things can we do to soften up the aesthetics, and then move on as rapidly as we can to construct those bridges. Thank you for your time tonight.
And last, before we get to questions, one of the good pieces of news has been the opening of the Montecito Recovery Center, and that effort is headed by Ben Romo, who's our newly titled Recovery and Community Engagement Coordinator. Ben, always an asset to the county, Ben Romo.
Thank you, Supervisor Williams. Just a quick update on the Montecito Center, which is at 1283 Coast Village Circle. Little flyer out back or front, which shows our hours. We're open 10 to 3 Monday through Friday, 6 to 8 on Wednesday, and 10 to 2 on Saturday. We opened on last Thursday, so a week ago today, and we've had a great showing of interest and a variety of issues that are being brought to the center that we've been able to help with. Right now, we're seeing a large influx of residents who are coming to sign up for and also follow up on their existing FEMA cases. So the deadline to sign up for FEMA is Friday. We have Jerry Grigsby from FEMA is in the room here, but we have staff from FEMA at the center assisting residents with that sign up. Many people don't know they are actually eligible for FEMA benefits, so we definitely want to get that word out. At the center is really meant to be a place where residents can come and access support for their recovery process and the rebuilding process, also to talk and share about the importance of preparedness for future events. So coming for support, we've had planning and development staff on site, and we're connected with those departments and public works, so we can often connect folks directly with their case planner. You saw where you can find that online, but for folks who want to have a conversation, please send them to the center where we can help facilitate connections with those points in the systems that are necessary to navigate for that recovery process. We also have counseling services in a partnership between the Department of Behavioral Wellness, which got a grant from FEMA. Our local nonprofit, the Mental Wellness Center, has a team of kind of grassroots counselors who are out in the community engaging and providing support and identifying folks who need a higher level of support. As we progress through the recovery process, and for example, with our most recent evacuation order, we saw a marked increase in the amount of folks asking for counseling support. And it's really important just to recognize how taking care of yourself is so critical as we're going through these very challenging times. And so please come and ask for that support. We have staff there from the counseling team during all of our working hours. An interesting program that we have been very excited to have at the center is the 805 Conservation Collective. These are a team of professional conservators, librarian experts, and they have a deep freezer which can freeze damaged items, artwork, and materials. And they deep freeze it to -19 degrees, and that kills the mold on items, and then they professionally clean it, and they're conservators, so they're trying to conserve those documents and materials and bring them back to as close as possible to their state before being damaged. So you can bring your materials there, they'll process it, and then work on it there at the center. Habitat for Humanity is also at the center, so assisting with those who need that additional support. We also want to be a place where we hear concerns. And this is really critical. And I'm not a big disaster response guy, so I've learned from the leadership who is in the Emergency Operations Center just how critical it is for our chain of command to have a direct link to what's going on in the real world and what people are going through. And the Montecito Center serves as a point through which we get information, and we're able to feed that up through the chain of command to help inform strategy, to help inform decisions, and to help inform, most importantly, problem solving. And how many of the solutions that you've heard our team describe tonight have come directly from concerns that we've heard from residents. So hearing from you is critical to inform our future efforts. So please come down to the center. We want to support you, and we're excited to be in the community. Again, there are flyers out back. Thank you.
So if folks have questions, it might be good for everyone to hear those questions. So if they could use the mics at either end, and maybe we could just go back and forth from folks. So anybody who has questions, just come over to the mic on either side. Corey, why don't you kick it off?
Hi. I first want to thank you and acknowledge your efforts at coming to our meeting and keeping the community informed on the evacuations, the rebuild, and just appreciate the attention you're giving the community. I have two questions. My first question pertains to the evacuation zones, and in particular to the gray zone. There are several homes in the gray zone, which is the burn area zone in the foothills, and the recent evacuation notices did not include any specific discussion about the gray zones, which I understand after the press conference was a voluntary evacuation. And so my question is twofold, actually. What is the gray zone? What are the risks associated with the gray zone? And then what decision-making goes into whether or not the gray zone should be evacuated, because it is different than the yellow zone.
Thanks for pausing between questions so I can get the intent of the whole question. So the gray zone is the areas on the map that are identified as the burn zone. This is the Thomas Fire burn scar that's up there. And in this area, all of our folks that we had study the map and provide input into the maps we're calling this a high-risk zone. So this certainly is a high risk, and why we've deemed it a high risk is because a lot of the areas within the burn zone are still unstable. There's still a lot of steep topography up there. We have a high chance for rolling rock debris, and I'm sure you can probably hear that as the storms go through, or even without the storms, you can hear the rocks coming down. So it's an area that is high risk. So we have a couple concerns in that area. One is that those rocks actually, can come down if they're close to, or if we have residences that are close to those hills, they can come down in sort of a dry avalanche kind of condition. And the second concern is that in those areas, rocks and other debris can come down. We still have trees up there that can be part of the debris as well, that get dislodged and can come down and be part of the problem. We're also concerned in these areas about people getting stranded. There's the way in which the roads weave in and out of the gray burn areas. There's a chance for people getting stranded in there, and rocks and other obstructions can easily block roads and leave people stranded. So those are our concerns, and we're going to do a better job at making sure in the future that when evacuation notices go out, that the gray zone, what to do in the gray zone, is listed also in the various ways we're going to be messaging that out. Okay.
Thank you. And then my second question has to do with the saturation of the hillside. And I understand that we're nowhere near saturation levels, but is that analysis any different for a burn area?
So that's a popular question this week. We've had it a few times, so I appreciate you asking that. The saturation zone, we certainly are not saturated in our soils in and around. We've had a few light rains, and we are certainly nowhere near our saturation point. So we have a team of communication experts that are putting together a short video on that talks about a little bit about what saturation is and what to expect in its relationship with debris flows, and also its relationship with faults where you can get a mass amount of soil, if fully saturated, that can have a fault, kind of a mudslide. And that's similar to what happened in La Conchita down there. So that's a different type of thing than a debris flow here that we've been concerned about. But certainly as we get more rains and we get closer and closer to saturation levels, we want to make sure that the community understands what that is and what types of things to expect in those conditions. So look forward to more information coming out in the next week about that. And I had a small error earlier, and I said that our website was recoversbc.org, and that is not the case. It's readysbc.org. So I apologize for that. Again, readysbc.org, and we'll have a chance to put up some other information on saturation on that as well. Thank you.
Sir? My name is Bob Marshall. I'm on Lilac Drive. I have a lot of questions about the evacuation threshold. There's some skepticism I hear, and we don't really know who sets the evacuation threshold. What's the science behind this half-inch per hour being the test? Is that being reviewed as we have episodes like we did last week where this test was met and there were no problems? Can we perhaps raise the threshold? Can we be told when there are rains coming, how much is expected within an hour, not just the threshold's being released, so we're telling you to evacuate? Is it a lot of rain? Is it 1 inch? Is it 2 inches? To give us an idea to evaluate on our own whether we should be evacuating or not. When there is evacuation, can we be told what roads are being closed off, where we can go and can't go for those people that are in yellow area and don't want to evacuate but still have to move around? And those are some of the issues on the evacuation procedure, which, as you say, is getting very frustrating for a lot of people.
Understood. Thank you for the question. So a couple things. One of the things that we're making sure that we message in the press releases is that we do list those amounts, the intensities that are predicted, and that meet the thresholds that are established by the National Weather Service for moving debris. And so let me back up a little bit. So our BEAR team, the Burned Area Emergency Review Team, and our WERT team, the Cal Fire Watershed Emergency Response Team, studied the area, and then based upon the way in which the fire burned based upon our soils and our geology and our watersheds established areas of concern. And they're obviously near the water courses and near our drainages that we have running up and down the channels between Carpinteria and Montecito. And the National Weather Services is the folks that establish the half an inch per hour criteria, or threshold, if you will. They're the agency that establishes that threshold that has the possibility of moving rocks and debris. We have a prediction that comes to us prior to an event, and in those predictions, they give us a confidence level, low, medium, or high confidence. They give us a predicted rainfall duration or an intensity per hour as part of that equation. We look at all of those factors, and if that storm is predicted to meet the half an inch per hour or higher, then we go through our normal evacuation criteria where we're watching 72 hours out, we're reaffirming as it moves through the milestones to 24 hours out, and then basing the evacuations on that. And what happened on the last event was the storm, as predicted, did not meet those thresholds: 72 hours out, 70 hours out, 60 hours out, 48 hours out. And just inside of 24 hours out, probably around 20 hours prior to the storm's arrival, the prediction changed. And at that time, that prediction was, I believe, 0.4 to 0.7 inches per hour, which was over the half inch per hour. So at that point, we engaged with our local partners. We issued the evacuations and the warnings because the storm was predicted to exceed half an inch per hour. And we were staged and ready, and a lot of people left the area, and some folks chose to stay. And the next morning, we did receive some rain, but the rain did not come through as predicted. And so we realized that about halfway through the rain event. The event was supposed to last somewhere between 7 a.m. and 1 p.m. And about 9, 10 in the morning, we were on the phone with National Weather Service, and it was through that call that we understood that the storm sort of fell apart and it didn't materialize as it was predicted. So that was the point in which we decided to cancel the evacuation and allow folks to get back to their homes. So that's kind of how it happened this last storm, and we would expect in future storms to use the same kind of criteria. Only evacuate if one of those thresholds and those intensities is predicted. And whether or not the storm actually comes through and as predicted is the wild card here. And that's the part where we are hopeful that the predictions are accurate and don't force us to needlessly evacuate. But we're also happy when we get the right amount of rainfalls in as well. So hopefully that answers your question.
So your threshold's never going to change, is what you're saying?
The threshold for the first 2 to 5 years until the vegetation recovers on the hill is probably not going to change. We're continually assessing that, but that's probably not going to change. I think that once we have vegetation starting to take hold up in the mountains, that we're going to obviously be revisiting that, and I think that will change the threshold dramatically.
Thank you.
Hi.
I'll just say something as a fellow evacuee. I mean, there's other ways we could do this. You know, I mean, I will not mention that jurisdiction's name, but there's another jurisdiction that had just the same amount of prediction of rain on 1/9 that we did. And they did no evacuations, right? Now, they are revising their thresholds upward, but not as much as we are, let's say that. And I just don't know that that's how you would want us to handle that. Because to me, that's relying on luck, which would mean that you're happy with us more often unless something goes wrong. And I don't think we want to rely on luck.
My name's Allison Marsalak, and I'm talking on the behalf of being a resident. I first want to say that I did go to the recovery center, and they did an excellent job, and I was actually contacted the next day by flood control, and he gave me 45 minutes on the phone, which was not probably the news I wanted, but he at least called me back, and I appreciated that, just to be able to be heard. My question is, and there's a statement in question. I have a case manager. I've submitted my like for like. I'm ready to go. And I have 4 kids, one that I have to put a deposit down on college on May 1st. And I was told on February 13th that it was going to be 60 to 90 days for those maps. So first I want to stress that when you get those maps, that I know there's ordinances, and correct me if I'm wrong, that need to be put in place to please move that along as quickly as possible. And it is a little uncomfortable to talk about my financial situation, but I do think I represent a large part. I know my friends and my other neighbors, that I have a cap on my LAE funds. I'm already 2 months in. I only have 15 months left. I'm making a mortgage, I'm paying taxes, and I'm paying rent. So my question to you, is it now 3 months from today that you expect those maps? Can we have any guarantee?
I'll let Matt answer the timing question, because we don't know that for sure. But what I will tell you is that just from your comments, you convinced me that what we should be doing is, and this is actually one of the things I can do unilaterally as chair, is schedule the ordinance, put placeholders on Board of Supervisors hearings on dates close to when we think the reports will come out, and when some of the ordinances would be ready, so that we don't have any delay. So I'll just start with that. You've convinced me to do something right here, right now. And the timing question, I don't think any of us completely know, but I'll have Matt give you our best estimate.
Thank you, Supervisor. So, and I'll make sure on our end, one thing is getting it on the agenda, and that certainly helps us, and I'll make sure that our team is ready to go. And I think one of the takeaways is that a lot of these things have been planned to be parallel processes, so that we are doing several things at the same time, so that they're not necessarily stacked on top of each other, drawing out the timeline even longer. So you've heard a little bit about the timeline. There was up to 3 months for the FEMA flood mapping, and that's certainly a big portion of that. And there are other things going along with that, surveying and monumentation, other hydrologic analysis. This Friday we have the Bear and Wort team coming back to the Emergency Operations Center to talk to us a little bit more about the combination of those 2 reports. So all of those things that we're looking for in order to get you ready to go, whether it's the planning urgency ordinance for the like-for-like, the FEMA mapping, the other topographic detail stuff, is all trying to happen in a parallel form, not serials, so that we can make sure that we are not exceeding that. So I will commit that we are going to do everything we can to exceed that timeline, and I've stressed that in the contracts that we're signing with consultants that are helping us and with our agency partners, that certainly we want to get everybody back on track as soon as possible. So thank you for your comments.
Hi, my name is Jane Werwind. I think I echo everyone saying thank you for you all being here. We have 2 properties, one on 11 Oaks Lane at Olive Mill, heavily damaged on the outside with mud. It's a 9,000 square foot lot. About a third of it has mud, and we just got a quote for $60,000 to remove the mud. So, I mean, that's that on a 9,000 square foot lot. Our second property is on the corner of Hot Springs and Olive Mill Road. It's an acre and a quarter. And our property and the property next to us is destroyed. And together we've got a couple of acres. So we know from the first day the county was using it to sort out debris, which is fine. So we've got a pile of cars, we've got a pile of trees, we've got huge boulders, and huge mountains of mud, which is growing, because I think from Casa Dorinda they moved a lot of the mud over. So we took it as a sorting ground, and we accept it, that's fine. However, we're now left with being told that we are responsible for everything on our properties. So my question is the county going to give us help to get the stuff that was put onto our properties that was not there the first day, or are we just left with the 8 cars and the 52 boulders and to figure that out? Because we're going to be looking between the 2 properties. If you can think of 9,000 square feet with just mud, $60,000, we're probably looking at close to $1 million for both properties.
Thank you for your question. I'm sorry for your loss and all the damages. Certainly we've had some cases where either through the search and rescue efforts or through additional sorting and mission priorities to clear roads and clear driveways and restore some of the basic infrastructure and utilities, that some parcels look different after the initial debris flow, and we're taking those on a case-by-case basis. So we'd certainly like to get your contact information after this meeting and make sure that we're following up, and that those items that ended up on your property that were not there that first day get looked at, reviewed, and hopefully we can help you out with those.
Okay, thank you.
One piece of advice about mud removal is, the price of mud removal has gone down from the initial amount. I can't predict the market, but my sense is that given a little bit of time, especially after we make this, we open up Tahigas on Tuesday, it will go down further. And so I would wait at least until Tuesday, if not a little bit longer, to let the market get a little bit more reasonable. It's partially because the distances are long. It's partially because there weren't very many options. It's partially the tipping fees, which will now have a cheaper tipping fee. And then it's partially because everyone was working, right? And hopefully as time passes, not everyone is working, and it's more reasonable for you to get some work done. Just make sure it's a state licensed contractor. Check on the state website. There's lots of people posing as that. And by the way, it's against the law to do more than $500 worth of work with someone who's not a state licensed contractor. And that law is there for a good reason. It's there to protect you more than for any other reason.
Hi there, I'm Jacques. My name is Jacques Marslack. 220 Olive Mill Road. My wife just got up, and I think it was a good segue, because I have the same issue. I mean, what I'm hearing is you guys are working a good deal, so us property owners can remove your debris at a discount, and it's not going over too well. So I have about an acre, and I visited the property about the day after, 2 days after, 4 days after, 7 days after, 14 days after, and every day there'd be additional debris placed on my property from either the easements or Olive Mill Road, or who knows where it came from. And Matt, I've called you, no call back. We've emailed you, no emails back. This is something that's untenable. And you can't push the burden on the emergency services that had to be done. You can't push that burden on the property owners. So I put in a claim. That's what I was told to do. No one will call me back. We're going in about 30 days from now, from when I put that claim in, and I've gone to risk management, try to get, hey, where I'm at, and nothing.
Well, I'll give it over to Matt in a sec, but I will tell you that there's a lot of differences of opinion out there. I mean, there are some people in Montecito that believe all of this is the county's mud, right? There are people who believe that. That would not be logistically or financially possible for us to deal with. We would not have the money to respond the next time there's a disaster. Just so that you guys give the backdrop, we have $56 million of cost in this just from the county. 13 million of that is not going to get reimbursed, and that's not even including the sheriff's numbers after the 27th of February. And sheriff's numbers are about half the number, so it'd probably be more like 20 million. So obviously I want them to look at it, and if it is something that, if it's a sorting pile, it's probably our fault. If something had to get pushed out of the way for emergency responders, that's a call that they may have to make. So I'll give it over to Matt.
Thanks, Toss. So John, thanks for the comments tonight. I appreciate, coming up and letting us know. So certainly, there's no excuse for not getting back to you. We have, as you can imagine, we have hundreds and hundreds of calls and requests every single day. And so there may be some that have fallen through the cracks, and I'm hoping that maybe yours is one of the only ones. I know we have a team of folks that are working on responding back for me on some issues, and we've engaged our communications team to make sure that the information that we're giving out is consistent and accurate. And I think that's part of the issue is we want to make sure that we're being fair and consistent to everybody, and certainly recognizing that some people have debris that was just left there from the event, and other people have experienced changes in things. And we've talked to some folks where cars ended up days and days afterward, or boulders, or different things. And I think there's a lot of things going on out there. Some people are dumping on other people's property. We've seen that. You've seen some messaging probably go out on people dumping illegally in the creeks. And so we've tried to message out on that. But one of the things that I'm assured is that in the cases where we have moved some stuff around and that we have gone in there and either used it as a sorting ground or there's additional debris that wasn't there after the debris flow, that we're evaluating those in our risk management area. And as you can probably imagine, our risk management folks, usually get, maybe, I'm not sure what the exact number is, but it's a very low amount of claims per year. And with this thing, they've just been inundated also. And that's no excuse for not getting back to you if you've tried to get a hold of them. And I'll make sure that after this meeting that I sit down with them and some other folks in the process, and that we're not only getting consistent information out, but we're making sure that we don't have anybody fall through the cracks on getting back to folks. And then we'll go ahead and review the claims, and in a lot of cases, we'll be able to help. In some cases, we may not be able to help, but we'll give you the fair process, and we'll definitely take a look at yours and make sure that it's being evaluated and you're being communicated to.
I appreciate that, but the reality is, and we're all in the same boat, the more we spend on debris, the less we have to rebuild our houses. And a lot of us are at the limits as it is. So it's a very, very critical thing for those of us that have a significant amount of debris that was placed after the slide. So, thank you.
Agreed. Thank you.
I'll also say something, since I think the FEMA personnel is out of the room, so hopefully don't tell them I said this. But it's part, even with the financial strain that the county is under, if there was any situation that meets FEMA criteria for removal of private debris, we basically have tried to take advantage of it. So where we found collections of half-acre lots where there was no staging ground, we had a safety case to make, and we were able to get some debris removed, private debris removed, with a public-private effort. If we had a case that we thought we would be able to push with FEMA, we would do it, even with the financial strain that the county's under, because if there's federal reimbursal involved, even with our match, it becomes possible.
Good evening, I guess. I'm Hugh Merrill, a resident. It was my understanding that there were specific funds made available by the Congress to support recovery efforts both here in Montecito and elsewhere. One question, are those all administered through FEMA, or is there another avenue that the federal government can be approached directly, or through Congress perhaps, to annotate those funds specifically for the cost that you anticipate for debris removal? In other words, we have a bunch of people trying to remove debris, which you have laid on the property owners to take care of. All that debris came from elsewhere, really, caused by something elsewhere, probably on federal property up there. My question is, why can't those funds be asked for directly by the county in this case to handle the issue?
Okay, Hugh, so the question really is, on the funds that were available through FEMA, are there additional federal funds that could be possible? This is one of the advantages of bringing in some folks that really know a lot about where the different buckets of funding are for the state and the federal government, and we've done that. And I would say almost all of the funds that Congress has made available to this are going through FEMA, and they are a part of this overall puzzle. We also are looking at applying for several different grants and other competitive things to try and help us cover future projects, whether it's debris basins or creek stabilization or additional mitigations that may help us be more resilient and in infrastructure. And so we're having some of our congressmen and some of our senators help us through those things to secure some additional funding. But right now, the only funds we're privy to are the funds going through FEMA for some of the debris on public right-of-ways. And so it's a continuous thing. We've got this board item going to almost half the amount of the gate fee for the Tahigas landfill to be able to take debris in there. We've had some other ideas with the exchange site to try and find some folks that need clean fill soil and other rocks and things like that. And our team's continually coming up with new ideas to try and help deal with the debris out there that's still out there. Certainly, as we alluded to earlier, trying to incorporate some of that into existing parcels and not move it out if possible has been talked about a lot, but that doesn't solve the problem. So we're still trying to solve the problem and give as many people as many options as possible. The question was, are our senators and Congress folks working with us on this? And I can tell you they absolutely are. We are in weekly conversations with every one of them and their staff. They're engaged. They have been helping us through the process, making sure that the director of Cal OES and our FEMA region director and everybody are engaged, and they are. And I can tell you that we've had lots of questions from them, a lot of input from them, and they constantly hand us things that they're hearing in the community that maybe we haven't heard, and try and problem solve those as well. So we've got them engaged for sure.
But I'm glad we all agree it's Forest Service mud. I was just trying to add some levity, but I'm glad we all agree it's Forest Service mud.
Yeah, right. Hi, my name is Lynn Jewett, and I'm a resident. I'm addressing probably the Caltrans gentleman on the end. My question has to do with just listening to this couple speaking about not being responded to. He did obviously extreme due diligence, did all the things. He watched his property, he checked he filled his forms, he did all of his things. He wasn't responded to. And then I wonder about a situation where on the end of my road, there was a lot of Caltrans cleared the road when it first happened so that we could get traffic through their emergency vehicles at Glen Oaks. And then a lot of debris was spread around just to make sure that was happening. Well, I've been watching that property now for the 2 months, and I don't see some areas they're starting to clear on the east side of the creek finally where they put some stuff, the Caltrans, when they were clearing the creeks. But there's just like this huge debris basin right there. And I know I'm not seeing that property is being taken care of, but that's kind of a sad situation. I don't know if there is anybody to speak to come clear my property. So I don't want to go down that path, but I do know that debris is most likely was pushed off the road, and it's just sitting there. Now, is there is it squeaky wheels that gets the grease? Is it somebody who gets in your face, Matt, and says, I need this now? Or somebody who's sitting here and doing all the due diligence doesn't get heard? And then what about Caltrans when they moved the stuff onto somebody's property because we had to get life going? Are they really gonna come back and take the rocks or the debris that they pushed off the road onto the properties? Is it really gonna happen? Or does that property owner, like these people, have to like clean up those piles? So I've got a couple of questions. It's like, is it only the people that can talk and get in your face that get the help?
Thanks for the question.
Yeah.
One of the things that
But I think it's for him as far as
yeah,
the
no, I'm
Caltrans.
gonna hand it over to them in a second, because they're a little closer to some of those operations than I am. But one is making sure that we know what's going on out there. I mean, we've got a lot of folks on the ground, a lot of operations. There's been a lot of things happening out there, and when we're clearing streams, they're not supposed to be dumping debris on the parcels. When they're clearing roads, they're not supposed to be dumping it on private parcels, making it somebody else's issue. They're supposed to be taking that, and that's what we've issued contracts for, and we want to make sure that we have good contract compliance. So if there are cases where that's not happening, then we definitely need to know about it. So with that, maybe I can turn it over.
And I'm going to give Chris a couple bona fides here so you know that somebody is definitely in Montecito's corner. Chris Sneddon, in my estimation, is probably one of the most responsive public servants. And part of the reason is he grew up here in Montecito, graduate of Montecito Union School. Chris Sneddon.
Cold Springs, Chesapeake. So we can't actually speak for Caltrans, but I just want to talk a little bit in generalities versus specifics on a couple issues that I think it's worth thinking about. There were a lot of entities out there, as you said, first responders and everybody and utility companies trying to get utilities, Caltrans trying to get their roads open, that were moving things where they needed to do that work initially. Speaking for county roads, we moved 8,000 truckloads of material, 30,000 cubic yards off the roads. We did not, as a rule, push material off of roads onto the properties. We did, in some cases, windrow it in the right of way on the shoulders and then pick it up later and things like that. But as a general rule, we were removing debris, not placing debris other places as a county public works. And I just want to say the reason that if you didn't hear back from Matt, and this is just how our department works, and I think how all the departments work, a claim is the right way to go if you think that you have some damage to your property or something that needs to be remedied. Once a claim goes in, though, that goes to our risk department, and it's a quasi-legal thing, and they become the point of contact. We don't have a lot of back and forth with people when it claims in. We're doing the research. I know your specific claim because our department has seen it and weighed in on it, but it circulates through the department, and they have a set period of time that they'll gather that information and get back to you. So a claim is not a bad thing, but it does somewhat cut off the conversation while we gather the information about the claim, and risk becomes the point of contact for it.
It had more to do with somebody who can't or isn't here to.
So let me get your information after this, and we'll get Matt or I will talk to Caltrans and get you the right person to talk to there about that specific concern.
I had two questions I wanted to follow up on. One was I had read in the Montecito Journal one of Bob Hazard's articles about FEMA and the individual grants, and subsequent to that I've been to 3 or 4 presentations, so I'm unclear. And perhaps FEMA or Ben Romo, you could get an answer to this. On the individual grants that FEMA issues for the mud and debris removal, does that go to the county or to the individual family? The reason why I'm asking, which will lead into my second question, Ben, for you, is that like on my property with $4 million in insurance for the structure, I find out now, after the fact, 3 fires later, my land's only insured for $5,000. That means if I have debris on my land or mud, everything above $5,000 I have to pay for. 5,000 is nothing. That's a tree limb almost on an acre plus property. So if you get a FEMA grant and it's the individual, which I'm unclear if Supervisor Williams, we've even applied for the FEMA individual grants, then where does that money go? Because $5,000 doesn't take the mud away, and if it goes to the county, it's not helping individual property owners, which then goes into the temporary housing. If in fact I only get 12 months temporary housing and I'm 2, 3, 4 months into it, I think it would be very helpful, and Ben, this is for you, to ask the insurance commissioner, just like he asked to tie in the two events, ask that when the county says we have to wait for mapping, that we get an extension on our temporary housing, because if you can't build and you're delayed 5 to 6 months because the county has to map and survey and do all this to make sure it's secure and safe, reasonable, but the insurance companies have to be party to that. So families don't fall apart and go into crisis, because any of us, like myself, if you're a single mom with a couple kids, you go into crisis. What am I gonna do? I can't imagine having 4 children or whatever your circumstance. So I think, if you could talk to the insurance commissioner and we could get clarity on where that FEMA individual step 3 money goes to. Thank you.
So there was a couple questions in that, and the first is that you might remember that the last time we were all in this room together, I promised to get a county insurance letter that essentially backs up your claim that that the fire was the proximate cause. We have that letter, we have that template, we can get that to anybody. It sounds to me that in many cases it would be useful to amend that letter to also put in the time frame of the rebuilding process, and I will attempt to have that letter amended. Individual assistance goes to the individual. It's easy that you confused it, because there's 2 forms of assistance. There's the assistance that comes to reimburse the county for our expenditures, but individual assistance goes to you as the individual. It does sound like you have a good claim. The problem with individual assistance is it is capped at, I believe, $32,000. But it sounds to me like you better get that claim in before Friday, because it sounds like you have both mud removal and potential temporary housing costs. It sounds to me that your insurance is more on the hook for some of that temporary housing, but one way or another, I would make a claim before Friday.
Whether it's me or anybody, if you have $1 million in mud debris, I don't care where it came from. As a county resident, I don't view that this couple or that couple or anybody should be responsible for what comes down the hill. I know I'm grateful if the Cold Spring debris basin catches the boulders before it hits Westmont or whatever, but when it comes downhill, I don't know that any of us, to be honest, I never even looked, and I never ever thought before to think about insuring my land. And then I find out that's a whole different kind of insurance. You hear about earthquake insurance, you hear about flood insurance, but nobody ever mentioned to me land insurance. We only insure our structure, temporary housing, and our jewelry and our instruments, but the land. And so now that we're in this new situation, we're hungry for information, and then we're hungry for the insurance commissioner or whoever, like you said, and I think it would really be helpful, Supervisor Williams, to amend the letter that because of mapping and the uncertainty, we want to ensure all the rebuilds are safe rebuilds. So if you could do that maybe with Ben, that could be coordinated and make it happen.
I will attempt to do that, and they make me run it by legal, but I will, so it might take a week or 2, but we'll attempt to do that. And we may not win every one of these fights, but we will try to back you up to give you as much support as we can to win as many of them as we can.
And if Ben would follow through with FEMA, that'd be great on the individual mud removal, because 32,000 is not $1 million.
Yeah, that's not going to cut it, is it? So I would suggest that you come into the center tomorrow or immediately after this event. They're waiting to help you sign up through that claim. They'll have a much better understanding, and they'll be able to describe much more what those funds are eligible for. And on the insurance issue, that's a great example of an issue that's come up repeatedly at the center. People are really struggling. Businesses that were that had to shut down for 25 days and lost $40,000 in revenue, and their insurance check just came in and it's $5,000, and they're not feeling that they're being responded to in the way that they expected when they paid for their policy. Now, the county doesn't have any regulatory control over insurance companies, but what we can do, and this is really the point of the center, is to help convene the community in a way that helps make that argument. So as Supervisor Williams said, we want to advocate on your side, and pulling the insurance commissioner down to talk about the issue that you're raising, and to hold the insurance company's feet to the fire. That's something that just this week popped up out of the Montecito Center, is something that we need to think about and have a strategy for, so we can build a collective voice that is stronger than just one person calling their insurance company and really applying that pressure. So I want to get your information.
I appreciate it, because I thought after the T-fire, many of us thought we did due diligence, and we did have 24 to 36 months of temporary housing is needed to rebuild. We really thought, and I have to tell you, I was just shocked. Mine was 12 months, and we rushed to get the Montecito Journal to see what we're missing or what we should be doing, and I'm glad you have the recovery center, but you're right, one person's not it. Yeah. It's all of us together to get everybody's mud done, and then everybody to make sure their children are safe and housed till they can get back into the homes.
It's also really important because we do have such a strong philanthropic community, and part of the role at the center is, and the work that the county is doing, one of the roles that I play is as a liaison with the philanthropic sector and with the nonprofit sector to help identify the needs and constantly assess the needs that are out there in the community, so we can help explain where some strategic investments might meet some of those gaps, where people are falling through those gaps, where the rules and regulations in the bureaucratic systems that do great work but maybe don't catch every person and their specific needs, so we can fill those gaps as well. So I'll get your information.
So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Mike Davenport, and I'm a resident, and I work in ag, so I understand the difficulties in trying to anticipate weather. You'd mentioned on the evacuation maps that you've put together that there's been some revisions so far, and I guess one question I had is, what's that process for revisions? And the second question I had is related to, and Supervisor Williams, you kind of alluded to the differences in how Santa Barbara and Ventura County have handled the situation, and obviously the recommendations from the WIRT report are the same in that whole area. So why is there such a difference in how that's handled? What's the difference in thought process is my other question.
So Mike, I can answer a little bit of that, I think. So some of the things, as this team comes together to try and solve problems, there's a lessons learned part of it that we kind of figure out as we go along. And some of it is in some of the earlier questions related to storm and storm preparedness. And we've recently done some changes in Carpinteria. We had a lot of discussion with City of Carpinteria on the map, and they really felt as though a couple little areas there shouldn't be in the high risk, and they should be more or not in the extreme area, but in the high risk area. So there's a lot of laboring back and forth on that and trying to figure out where those are. What we're trying to do is be as consistent as possible. Obviously, some folks would rather be on one side of the line and rather be in high risk than extreme risk, or rather be in less than that risk across the board. And so we're trying to use as much science-based information as we can on this. But that said, every time we make progress in clearing the stream channels, in making sure those debris basins are empty, assessing them after a storm to make sure that they don't fill back up again with other stuff, we're constantly assessing and going back to the books to make sure that the evacuation areas and the labeling that we have on them is appropriate. And I think as we also get information from the public, I know that we've been in conversation with several folks back and forth at the EOC with their residences and their businesses, that having questions on one side of the road versus another side of the road, and what are the differences there. And as a common theme through it, whether you're in a high risk area or an extreme risk area, there's certain, we want everybody to exercise as much caution as possible, because the predictions from especially the storm aren't going to be perfect each time. But as we hear about those, I'd encourage you to either contact Montecito Information Center or call the call number that we have, and try and get you in touch with somebody to ask some specific stuff about about maybe your property or where that falls in the whole scheme of things on the map. You know, we have learned some things and gone back out each time, and you know, there were some properties that were on some real high elevation portions that were nowhere near creeks that popped up red. And so when we have little isolated cases like that, we'll go ahead and look at it. Sometimes there's a field review, and then we'll adjust if we need to. But for the most part, that's that. And you know, again, it's the lessons learned. Every week we're learning a little bit more. We're watching how these storms come in and what they're bringing down and what they're not bringing down in some cases. And we're going to continue to adjust our strategies based upon that. So thank you for your question.
I'll just say something. I mean, I just think that Ventura made the wrong call with Ojai. I mean, they had the same weather report that we had. They had the same burn conditions, and they didn't evacuate anybody, and they got lucky. I think that, but I still think that was the wrong call. And it's hard for governments to do the preparation for this. Any evacuation, any preparation we do when there's not a disaster, we pay all of it. None of it's federally reimbursed. So there's actually a financial incentive for us to do nothing and not evacuate you at all, right? That's where the financial incentive is. But I feel like our folks, we made the right call and we evacuated people. It wasn't right enough to save everyone's life. And that, you know, weighs on all of us. But we made the right call and we were still unlucky. You know, the sun shines on both the just and the unjust. And that's the way it works. And we have to learn from it and keep on doing it better.
And one more thing, Mike. You know, one of the things that we pressured that Bear team early on when the Thomas Fire was still ripping and it was headed north, kind of out of our area, is they did our assessment first. And so they focused those limited resources, that team of folks, on our area before they went down to Ventura. And so our report came out a lot sooner than theirs did for the Bear, at least the early findings part did. And same thing as our CAL FIRE folks that were invested in that watershed emergency response team. They had their information to us before Ventura County got theirs. And so they focused on us first and then moved south. And that was a big part of helping us understand, you know, that 1.9 debris potential for that 1.9 storm that was coming through. And so that could just be another thing. But again, you know, they use different evacuation notification techniques, and they have a little bit different language, which we were concerned about initially because the terminology was a little different between warning and mandatory. And so each jurisdiction is learning from their last activation, and I would think that with a future heavy storm, that they would probably be more in line with what we're doing.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. My name is Jay Higgins. I just have three quick questions. I'll be brief. They're rather detailed about the procedures going forward, and thank you, Supervisor Williams, for bringing forward some new language or ordinances that sort of moves the process faster, like for like. The first question I have is, and I'm interested in if you're going to do it better, it can still be like for like, moving it away from the creek. Who makes that decision that this like for like, that's not exactly like for like, is still exempt from a land use permit?
Well, obviously, that would be ultimately a planning director decision, meaning it'd be a staff level decision and then a planning director decision. But I think the guidance we would want to give in the ordinance is, you know, the same relative amount of footprint, somewhat the same shape of the footprint, but that you'd be able to move it away from the creek or to higher ground as long as you're not interfering with your side, rear, or front yard setbacks. And then in cases, I think, frankly, the other question comes, what if you could only build, and the only way you could rebuild would be into the setbacks? And I do hope that, and plan on having an appointee, one more appointee to the Montecito Planning Commission that's willing to look at that and isn't saying, no, we wouldn't give a variance on any these projects.
So the next question is like for like can sometimes not meet building code standards for today, energy compliance? Is there any discretion you can give to your building official as to like for like maybe not being up to current building codes?
No, we would need a change in state law to do that. Building code, I mean, land use codes are totally like our local discretion. Building codes are not. It has to be up to the current building and safety codes, and we can't really do anything about that.
Thank you. I understand that, but I just wanted to get that out there because it can be more problematic in some cases than a land use waiver or variance. My last question is with regard to the remapping of the basins or the floodway, and I understand you need to take the time to get that right, and it's going to be a tremendous amount of pressure and liability too. So taking the time is important. My question though is invariably there's going to be a dispute. Is there an appeals process as to when those maps come out? Because those come out, and those are based on science, not discretion, I assume. So is there an appeal process for something that is just based in science, or does that appeal process stop with FEMA and that's it?
Good question. So, I think one of the things that we're looking at is, obviously the science is the science, and we're going to get that, and that's usually how things rolled out before with the FEMA flood maps, and they have certain criteria that are built in there. And I know that we're probably not going to deviate far from the science, but there needs to be a period of time when we get this information where we can all kind of wrap our heads around it and what it means specifically on the ground to the parcels most affected. And that's where hopefully our case managers in the planning development department are in lockstep with the property owners to make sure that they're understanding what this means, what it doesn't mean, and that we have a lot of time built into that as soon as we get that thing for everybody to kind of understand what it is, take the information back, process it, and then move forward if that's the case. And the other thing I would say is that as we talk about this like for like and potentially adjust the where, because the current like for like, if we had a wildland fire, is to rebuild on the same place and location on that. And so when we start adjusting that on parcels, certainly neighbors and view sheds and all those other issues come up as we're normally dealing with. So I would just recognize that as well.
So I appreciate the answer, the appeal process, and I'm wondering if not an appeal, but then a design adjustment process. So if you are stuck with that line on your property that you don't want, are there design like building up out of that is that another level of discussion that could happen later?
I think the answer on whether it is possible to appeal the FEMA designation, we don't know. I don't know. Anybody here know? I don't think anybody knows. But the answer is, could we adapt to that? I sure hope we can. I mean, that's why I mentioned this is going to take a little bit of a values change on our community part if we want to allow people to rebuild in a safer manner. To date, our ethic in the community has been, oh, you should excavate grade downward, right? So that you're more out of the view of your neighbors. Well, that happens to be more dangerous, right? If we really want people to rebuild in a safer manner, it means their buildings might be more visible. And, I for one think aesthetics are really important, but that safety is more important. And I hope people will embrace that because I think that we want to be a safe community, and to be a beautiful community, it also helps to be a safe community.
Hi, I just have a quick question regarding the hauling, going back to hauling. Is there a requirement at all that the haulers cover, whether it be the mud and debris, or as we move forward, removing the destroyed homes. Is there a requirement that they be covered? Those trucks?
So that's a question I don't know the answer to and I haven't heard yet. I don't think that there is. You think there is? All right. We're getting some nods of yes, but that's something that we'll look into and find out exactly what that is, because you bring up a good point. You know, early on we were really concerned about the dust in the community and all the trucks that were kicking up dust, and a lot of stuff was still slopping out of the trucks when it was really wet, and then drying out on the road and then creating a lot of extra dust in the community. So we'll look into that, and I think the team feels pretty confident that there is a requirement for that. But we can make sure that we're also educating and enforcing it probably a little more as well.
That was my next question, because I was in the T-Fire, and I think that probably there was about a 2-year window where people were at different rates removing the destroyed homes, and, you know, all the things that go with those homes with the asbestos and melted plastics, and nobody was covering the trucks. There was no oversight, and very concerned about that for health and safety. I think it is causing health problems around town, and just wondered who to contact as far as who would maybe be the contact for oversight on that type of thing. And hopefully, you know, I don't know, I know that when the Jesucita fire happened, they had one sign at the bottom of Mission Canyon, and it said all trucks must be covered. Now, whether you put one or a few in the exclusion zones, and then also oversee what's going on so that there is some sort of a...
This is definitely a concern, and it's been on my radar screen. In fact, we caught some folks who were county contractors who had not been covering, and you know, that's much easier when it's mostly the public debris phase. So it was easy. They either worked for us or they worked for FEMA, and we could, you know, bust some heads pretty easily. The problem is now we don't know who they work for, right? And so that's going to be, I think, a community-wide thing that every one of you that hires somebody, you gotta really stress it, because post facto enforcement is not very easy when there's at least a couple, you know, 100 people that could have been hauling it.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Peter Hunt, and I'd like to ask a question. First of all, I'm very encouraged by the recognition that the mud mainly comes from federal lands. I'm encouraged that you're approaching the insurance commissioners and those things. I'd just like to say that, you know, we've had a dozen fires or so since 1995. There was a change in federal policy then with the 1995 Federal Wildlands Fire Management Policy, and which said in part that fires that are started naturally are good for the ecosystem and should be allowed to burn, in effect. And since 98% of all wildfires do not start naturally, but are started by human beings in one form or another, whether it's a power line blowing over, or it's an automobile fire or something, would you consider asking the federal government to perhaps change their policy? Certainly fighting wildfires is not easy. I'm not saying that had the policy been changed, this would have happened, but nonetheless, allowing something to burn, you know, we saw it burn right down to the city hall in Ventura, and then, you know, a week or two later, it's burning here, and, you know, to be, it's easy for me to say, not being a firefighter, you know, chase the fire into the backcountry, but nonetheless, when the policy says you don't have to do that, well, then wildfires have a tendency to go wild, and I'm just hoping that that we could get some sort of conversation going with this policy.
Our fire chief, Eric Peterson, is very determined to do more preventative work. It's definitely been harder because the fire season has lengthened because of climate change, so now you have this narrower time to do controlled burns. But I know of at least 3 controlled burns that have just been done in the last month and a half. And so I do think that the message that you're giving is coming through. And because the county does so much of the wildland work too, we may be able to have an effect on at least some of the public lands.
Hi, my name's Karen, and I guess what I'm trying to do is get a handle around the area that's the redrawing of the FEMA maps apply to. And this is sort of a two-part question. The first is, are the FEMA maps being redrawn in only the red areas on the map, or would that also apply to areas outside in the yellow zones?
Hi, Jeff. I'm gonna get beamed by that. Answering that, I was at the kickoff meeting where FEMA was talking about their process. Right now, they're really trying to identify their scope of work that they're going to be doing as far as where that remapping is going to occur. I think initially they're focusing on that area, that red area, but it's really going to be driven by the science and the data that they gather as they go in there and they start running the models and gathering the information. So right now it's a little premature to identify exactly the extent of that remapping. Initially, they're looking at that, of course, that red area. But as the science and the data comes out, we'll have a better understanding of, what the breadth of that remapping would look like.
And then the other part of my question actually applies to the county process in the rebuilding. Again, I'm trying to understand this, because within the red zones, particularly in some of the lower areas, there are homes that are green, there are homes that are yellow, and there are homes that are red tagged. And so trying to help clients who live in some of those greenhouses or those yellow houses, are all those homes with their rebuilding process on hold, or is it really going to be on a case-by-case basis? And these are homes that are within the red area now. So I'm trying to understand that. Does that make sense?
So our initial efforts really is getting as many people back in their homes as possible. And so two parts of that question, it is a case by case depending on the degree of damage or the impact that the property has. Our drive is to provide opportunities to turn those properties that have been tagged red into yellow and eventually into green. But as you know, every property is different and it has its own different set of circumstances. So that's really where we're looking at it with the case managers and with the building official, is identifying what is the breadth of the work that needs to be done. Is it just repairing a wall that could potentially turn a property into red to yellow and then eventually to green? Or is it, the house is completely gone or there's a lot of damage? And that's really where we're weighing the options for property owners as far as what choices can they make to move forward. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
It does make a difference whether it's a repair or a rebuild. I mean, the county, whether we allow you to rebuild something that is geologically unsafe or whether we allow you to repair something that's geologically unsafe is a massive legal difference, and so I do think that people who are doing genuine repairs are going to have an easier time and should go forward and shouldn't be intimidated. People who are attempting to rebuild, my advice would be to wait for the geological risk assessment. But if you're just trying to repair mold damage and removing some pieces of your wall and replacing them, I don't see any reason why you shouldn't go see Petroleva and everyone at the counter at the county. And
So conceivably, those green ones that are just minor repairs won't have to wait for the FEMA mapping, even if it's in the red area. I know I don't want to hold you to anything, but we're trying to get our hands around this as to how we're going to be able to move forward with the clients that we're helping.
Ma'am, that is correct, and thank you for that. Really, the green one, just a point of difference, is really there's probably no structural damage to that. It was mainly debris, clearing of that. It's the yellow ones that we're really focusing on to get those turned to green, and those are the ones that have some repairs that could be done relatively with just building permits and aren't going to require this analysis, further analysis we talked about. So it is case by case, and it depends on the extent of the repairs, extent of the rebuild, where it would trigger that, waiting for that further information to come to make sure it's a safe structure to do that.
Matt, I'll make this, I'm Suzanne Perkins. I'll make it fast because I know everybody's been a long day. I have a map question, and it has to do with the hazards map. What exactly is that going to entail? Is it the floodways of the creeks, the floodplain of the creeks, or is it something entirely different?
So my understanding is that that FEMA is going to go in and look up and down the stream channel and understand what has changed out there. Certainly they have a different set of circumstances than they did when they made the original base maps long ago. And part of that includes depth of the channel, obstructions in the channel, height of the channel, and which all ultimately go into formulas that determine the setback. So I think all of those things are going to be looked at, unless I missed something from the team here. Those are the kind of things that go into the setback from the creek that then drive the planning processes and that kind of thing.
So how does that differ from the baseline maps FEMA's going to be redoing? I understand the baseline, but is the hazards map remapping, because we don't have a hazards map now?
I think it's one and the same. They're redoing these baseline maps and they're taking in account some of the things that have changed out there.
So it really isn't a new map.
Right.
It's just an incorporation in the baseline map.
It's redoing the baseline map, really.
Okay,
It's
great.
just swapping that out with a newer one.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And
Thank you,
thanks for all you're doing.
Thanks.
Hey, Matt, Jacques again. I'll, real quick here, I'll take my angry debris hat off and put on my concerned rebuilding guy hat. And I want to implore, this is more for planning and development, the land use permit and the exemption and the like for like. I know that there was some talk about if certain parcels have to move the building footprint within that, or certain homes have to move within the footprint, if that can still qualify for like as long as square footage. But what we're getting into is the height. So the 10% height like for like is going to be probably popped by whatever the new base flood elevation is and how high we have to go. Our house was built in 48. Right now, according to the base flood elevations that I was given, and then they said don't use it anymore, we'd have to go up 3 feet. So if the new maps have it, we have to go up 5 or 6 feet. We can't really accommodate that with the roof line adjustments. So I implore the Board of Supervisors and everybody to take that into account and hopefully be a little more lenient on the 10% height adjustment. If it's nothing of our doing, if it's a compliance-oriented thing, we shouldn't be thrust into the whole land use permit and MBAR and everything just because of that. So,
thank you. That was a wonderful, that's really important. And the fact you brought it up is very helpful to me because, planning development is going to develop the ordinance, but it's my intention, the whole purpose is to not provide you a disincentive to remove that mud, or not to provide you an incentive to remove that mud. I want you to use that height. So it would be my intention by bringing that forward, by allowing you, if your base elevation has risen 5 feet, that you still have the same height of a building, which does mean that your building would be more visible than it was before. And to me, if this community really wants to allow people to rebuild, then they'll support that. And I think this is something that hopefully people will wrestle with, because the longest part of the construction process, and the one that makes the horror stories that you hear about where people say, I was building my home for 6 or 7 years, is because of the appeals process. It's because of the land use permit. And it's our intention to streamline it for folks that are willing to do a building the same size as the old building without a land use permit.
Yeah, no, that's great, because it ties into everybody's additional living expenses, because so we don't have a choice. We have to do whatever, we're beholden to you as to what's really like for like. So if we're thrust into a non-like for likes situation because of a new ordinance, then we don't feel that that's, that still should be like for like, as long
Right.
as everything else is like for like.
And the problem is under the old, like for like ordinance, the one used in the T fire, almost no one would qualify because the elevations have changed for everybody. And so that's why we got to change it.
Hi, Chad Chase. And on Ortega Ridge, it was a one-lane road for about the last year. There was some settlement on it. And with all the construction trucks and the dirt trucks going over on the one side, it's been kind of a mess, and there's only...
I'm going to take a break for a second.
Yeah.
Just, does someone see Chris Snedden? Is he still in the building? Because that's the only person here that I know that can answer that question. There he is, see? This is great. Okay, I just wanted Chris to be here for all of your questions.
No,
because
that's good.
I had a premonition that he was the one that can answer it. Okay. Go ahead. Start from the beginning, please, sir.
Okay, so on Ortega Ridge, it's been a one-lane road for the past year before this incident occurred, and it's just been coned off, and there's settlement on the road, but it hasn't been fixed. And during this whole time, we've had all of the construction trucks going back and forth, and it's a one-lane road, and it's the only way to get to 192 and Ladera, et cetera, and all that whole area. What's the schedule for getting that repaired?
All right, that's a good. I've gotten that question a couple times already. So
I already asked that question.
yeah, but especially from top. It's funny to have a microphone now that there's like 10 people here. But so the short answer is we're hoping to get a grant that we'll know about in the next month that would allow us to repair it all the way. So it's back to 2 lanes, probably sometime towards the end of summer. In the absence of that, it's a pretty complicated site, and it's a pretty expensive site, and we would probably be maintaining it as it is for a while. But we're feeling pretty good about that, the prospects for that.
I understand that the eventual repair will have to be significant. You probably have to put in caissons, et cetera, and really support the soil. But right now, you've got a collapse on the other side of the road just from the weight of the trucks. So you've got a situation where you have a very uneven road. And I would just like to suggest that it be temporarily filled in so that we had a level road, a safe road to drive on, and then later repair it properly. But for right now, that's a very busy road to be compromised the way it is.
Yeah, I understand, and I know some of the delays are a little frustrating. The issue with that is that side of the road, the reason we coned it off is it can't support loads. It definitely can't support truckloads. That's why we ended up making it a 1 lane. We did a geotech investigation. It's just, it doesn't have the strength to have trucks running on it. So, I mean, we're definitely committed to making sure that 1 lane stays open. We've been patching it pretty regularly, but I sympathize with your frustrations. We need a little patience on that. And the other thing is the basin clearing is drawing to an end. So that piece of it that was really problematic has been ameliorating now. So
if you fill in a sinkhole and you don't get structurally why it's a sinkhole, you'll just
I understand that completely, but I also understand that right now it's a pretty bad situation that went for a whole year not being addressed before we had this, and now it's been exacerbated to a terrible situation. The side of the road that is open is split from the weight of the trucks. So you actually have a depression on the one side, so when I drive over, it scrapes the bottom of my car. And I imagine it does it for anybody. I mean, when I'm in my truck, it's okay, but when I'm in my car, it scrapes it. And I don't think that's an okay way to leave the road. So I'd strongly suggest that it be dealt with, whether temporarily or permanently, but as quickly as possible. Thank you.
I can tell you that I will be lobbying Chris and his boss for as much road repair in the 1st District as possible, and that's obviously one of the hot spots. And as judging from the fact I asked him the same question earlier today, so it's a source of concern.
We will, but just we'll get some eyes on it in the next day or two and repave it if it does have that, if that spot's coming back that was low. I know we've already done it once, but we can do it again too.
Thank you very much.
Okay, anyone else have any other questions? No? I think we've cleared out most of the room. Yeah, that's good. There's more. We're outnumbered them now. That's great. So those of you that want to stick around, please stick around, come and find us, and the rest of you have a nice evening. We'll be back in 2 weeks to do this again.